Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. If you're not watching this on the new WatchBox app, you're doing it all wrong. New features available on the Apple App Store or Google Play. You'll see WatchBox Studios content 1 week early, exclusive on the app. Plus, you can read editorial content from our own Jack Foster and your favorite third-party watch journals, magazines, and blogs. Also, shop our inventory, browse 3,000 pre-owned and vintage luxury watches while also storing your collection, including details of condition, box, and papers. Finally, stay in touch with me, my team, and our entire family of WatchBox client advisors around the world. I'm Tim, and I'll see you on the app.
Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. I believe that one of the reasons we share our opinions and stories and emotions as collectors is because we want to relate to others who feel the same way. A lot of times here on Collector Conversations, we look at aspirational collections, collections that we would love to own someday. Today, we see that, certainly, but also a collection in which we can see ourselves, because often we start exactly the same. Shane, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate you having me.
And the fun thing is, we really can relate to how you started, because people underrate the importance of fashion watches in the hobby. But it was absolutely critical for me and for you.
Yep, absolutely.
Just tell me a little bit about how that started.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, you sort of find your way into wristwatches for whatever reason, right? And you wear something that is inexpensive, but you get used to having it on your wrist. And in my 20s, I sort of got into that, and got into something like this. It's a Kenneth Cole.
Kenneth Cole. And it's a Kenneth Cole with a day and a date function.
Yep.
And a chronograph. Or is this not a chronograph here? This is a new discovery for me. What are the functions of this watch?
Yeah, I don't even know, to be honest with you. I'm not even sure if it works anymore. Yeah, it doesn't even work anymore. So it wasn't about the functions to me. It was about, I wanted a skeletonized watch at the time. And I think I got this on Amazon for like $100. And I wore this for years. And then I had a couple Scoggins. And those were the watches I wore in my 20s. And I was around other people at the time that had nicer watches, the Rolexes and Breitlings. And I always aspired to have those, but could not afford them at that point in my life. But yeah, these are the watches I wore for years when I was in my 20s.
I remember back when I was in high school, I would have seen this thing with a display case back and a rotor, automatic winding.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you would have been the king of the castle with a thing like this back in high school. Did you pick this out, or was it a gift?
No, I picked it out. I think I bought it on Amazon, if I remember right. And it was in my 20s. This was past high school. Like way back when, like middle school, I wore swatches like everybody else. But then, yeah, when I got out of college and I just needed something to put on my wrist, and that's what I went with.
Oh my gosh, 50 meters water resistant. Did you ever test the theory?
I did not.
Good practices right from the beginning,
yeah,
I guess.
Probably.
But no, this is important because fashion watches are often a gateway to the world of luxury timepieces, because let's be honest, this is an expensive hobby.
Yeah.
Once you got to the point where you could start thinking about a luxury watch, I think you had two requirements you related to me, and one was no Rolex.
Correct. Yeah, I don't know why, it's funny thinking back at it now, but I just didn't want the stigma of Rolex. I was finally at a point where I could afford something nice. And there's a lot of other people that in my company that had Rolexes, and I didn't want it. I didn't want the stigma. I didn't want the brand. And so I was sitting there on my couch, and I'm like flipping through watches on my iPad, and I was watching BBC. I was watching Top Gear on BBC, and up comes a Tudor commercial, and I'm like, what the heck is Tudor? And so I look it up, and sure enough, I find this thing, the Black Shield, and this was right when Tudor was re-entering the U.S. market. So I'd never heard of Tudor before. So I'm just getting back into watches and learning about them. And so this guy came up, and I start calling around, and nobody has it yet. And so fast forward, it's probably like a month I had to wait, and somebody finally calls and like, yeah, we have the one that you want with the leather. And so I drove out there and got it. And this was my only watch for about 2 years. So Didn't matter what I wore, if it matched, if it didn't match.
And how did you feel when you first put that on?
Oh, I love that watch, and it's a tank. This thing's a tank. It's a chronograph. I mean, it keeps great time. I didn't know anything about ETA or in-house movements at the time either, nor did I really care. But it's a tank. I mean, I've hit this thing all over everything, and there's not a scratch on it. This was a great watch. It was a great first watch, probably something I'll have forever.
And you like cars and motorcycles.
I do.
You like the automotive realm. So this is, of course, Ducati inspired.
Yep.
Are you a Ducati fan?
I'm not. I love motorcycles, but I think I'd kill myself because I love speed. So I keep four wheels under me at all times. But just the racing in general, the racing look of it, and it fits my arm perfect. It's just a great watch. And it was the only thing I had for 2 years.
And back in 2013, you could have had a Daytona if you wanted a Daytona. It was a different market, pricing was different.
Oh,
But
you walk in and get it.
You chose the Tudor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
That's cool, because you've had watches come and go from your collection, but that one stuck around.
Absolutely. I paid full price for that too. Like, I was on a waiting list for a Tudor. Like, if you think about that, how crazy that is back in 2013.
Because they were just coming back to the market.
Exactly. Yep. Nobody had them.
I see something that's fascinating. Like we get deeply into cars. I know, for me, it's like American performance, like 1960s muscle Corvettes. For you, it's European exotics. You got a McLaren. But we love our first cars, and our first cars are like the equivalent of the first watch that's a fashion watch or the first luxury watch that's a Tudor. They often mean more to us down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my first car was a 1953 Oldsmobile, big giant tank.
The Rocket V8?
Yeah. That was a
Cooler
great
than
car.
my first car. I had a Jeep Cherokee. But I loved that Jeep Cherokee.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was a great car.
And
Slow, hot. I was in Florida. I grew up in Florida, and I had no air conditioning. I mean, that's so.
It had a 450 air conditioning, 50 miles an hour, 4 windows down.
It did. It had this little door that you opened up on the floorboard, and air ran in. Not joking. That was where the air came in. Yeah, but during the winter time, it served as heat because the heat came off the engine. You just open up the little door, and the heat would come in the car.
So now, did you go on a Tudor kick? Because you've got the Bucherer Bleu bronze. Was this the next step, or was there an intermediate step into the watch world?
There was a couple intermediates, actually. So about 2 years after I bought this, I decided it's time to move on. I want my next watch. And by that time, I'd been reading, watching you and the Hodinkis of the world and everything. And I decided I want a vintage Tudor. So I was thinking maybe I'll just collect Tudors. And I went down the rabbit hole of vintage everything. From Rolexes to Tudors, to 1675s, 5513s, 1680s, all that stuff, right up on. And I was introduced to a guy out of Florida, and he was a dealer, so he dealt in Rolex and Cartier, but he also was a big collector. And mainly vintage Rolexes was what he was collecting, and so he talked me out of vintage Tudor, and so then I got stuck on vintage Rolex for a little while because I'm like, you know what, it's still a Rolex, but it's not a BL&R. It's vintage, and so then he started to show me some of his collection, and he showed me a picture of this. I'd never seen it before. I had no idea what it was, and so the 1655 Explorer 2, just a crazy weird watch. Just everything about it's weird. Cave Explorers, 24-hour orange hand. There's nothing normal about that watch, and that's what drew me to it.
It's kind of cool, though, because you had this no Rolex rule right out of the gate, but you found vintage Rolex more acceptable than a modern piece. I guess this is just a little bit more soulful?
I guess, yeah. I think because in that, no one, for the most part, you can't look at that and say Rolex. Your average person, anyway. I mean, maybe you could see, the date window and that kind of stuff. For the most part, no one's going to look at that and think expensive Rolex, even though it's more expensive than a modern Rolex. And I don't know. I think that's what drew me to it. It was just it's still really cool. It's vintage. It's got this great look to it. Rolex or not, it was just a cool watch.
Yeah, I guess every once in a while, someone's like, "Look, I can settle. I can reconcile myself with Rolex, but it's got to be an oddball model like a Milgauss or an Explorer 2, or it's got to be a vintage watch, not something I just went down to the dealer, plunked down money, and bought out of a case."
Yep. So it took me about maybe a month or two to get that out of his hands. He actually had two. But he didn't want to sell either of them. And then finally I talked him into it, and his daughter was in college, and he's like, I could use some money for my daughter anyway. So he ends up selling me that watch. And I had it ever since. I think it was end of 2015, early 2016 maybe.
And he was not a guy to sell watches out of his collection. He's
No.
a dealer, but not from his own
No,
stock.
yeah, he collected a lot of vintage watches. So yeah, he had red line Seamaster, double red Sea Dwellers, 1675. He had everything from the vintage market, but he let that one go. He had another one, so he was fine.
Did you ever get the sense with a vintage watch that there's something liberating about wearing a watch that's imperfect, that could never be showroom stock, clean, devoid of scratches? You don't worry as much when you wear it?
100%. Yeah, and whoever owned that obviously wore that thing every day. I mean, it's beat up. It's got a lot of love taps on it. But yeah, whoever had that was their daily watch, I assume, for years.
Yeah, I mean, you could say it has character.
It definitely has character. Yep.
So now I guess eventually you went over to the dark side, because I see a black and blue GMT right here.
Yeah, so that was a weird one. That was years later, and it was right when Rolex started to get crazy, where you just couldn't go get one anymore. And believe it or not, the guy that sold me this had one of these at the time, and he was going to sell me a full set for $7,500 a BLNR, because that's before everything got crazy. And so fast forward a couple of years, and I was calling ADs just to see if I could get one, thinking there's no way. And the second call I made, the lady's like, "Yeah, we have one. Should I put it on hold?" I'm like, "Are you serious?" Like, "Yeah, go for it. Put it on hold." She's like, "I can hold it for 24 hours." It was a jewelry store that also had Rolexes and some other brands. I have a feeling she was on the jewelry side, and she didn't know that she couldn't just sell it to anybody. And but I walked in the next day and picked it up. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, what if I don't like it? I'll flip it. But I'm not a flipper, so I ended up keeping it, and I don't wear it all that often anymore. Probably for the first year I had it, I wore it a lot.
That's one hell of a story about how that came into your collection.
It was random, very random, yeah. But they sold it to the right person. I'm not a gray market dealer or a flipper, and all these years later I still have it. So, yeah, it's a great watch.
Do you travel with it?
I do, yeah, especially early on. I mean, nowadays I travel with some of these other ones more often than not. But early on, for the first year I had that, I probably wore that all over the place. And now it doesn't get a whole lot of wrist time anymore, but it's still a great watch.
It's fascinating. You didn't go through the usual cycle of the watch enthusiast where you start believing Rolex is the greatest watch in the world, and then there's like a reaction formation where you totally resent Rolex because now you've learned that Patek Philippe exists and Rolex is overrated and you don't want to be a Rolex fanboy. You went straight from no Rolex to quite comfortable with the brand, but you like them slightly offbeat.
Yeah, for sure. Again, if I didn't get one of those, I would not have chased it, I'll put it that way. I just, for whatever reason, was calling around, and the lady said, "Yeah, we have one." So I'm like, "All right, I'll take it." But what got me more into the independence was this specific one, and it was the year that when all the new releases were coming out, and everybody was going crazy, and they were talking about the new Rolex that may come out and everything, and I was all excited about it.
What year was this, roughly?
I think it was 2018, maybe, and it was when they re-released the Pepsi.
Oh yeah, that was 2018.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, it's a Pepsi. I'd rather have a 1675, but okay. And it just sort of like instantly turned me off from Rolex. That everybody went crazy over just a reissued watch, but I'd already had it in my mind that I was going to buy something new, and I was sort of looking forward to something cool coming out of Rolex, and that didn't do it for me. And so I'm watching videos and stuff. That watch was in your hands. That exact watch. It came from Govberg at the time. And you were reviewing it, and I always loved the Type 3, but I didn't want to part with 30 grand at the time, and this was less than half. And I'm like, that's what I'm going to go with. I really love that watch, and Ressence is just so cool. I mean, everything about that brand is fantastic, and that got me into the indies. So
now I see two themes in terms of this collection, stretching back from high school to the present. You've got watches with red accents, and you've got watches with blue accents. Did that just happen, or did you plan it that way?
It just happened. Yeah, there's no rhyme or reason to it. Just what I was attracted to at the time. Now going with like the Doxa, I specifically went blue on the Doxa.
But you wanted the Caribbean dial.
I wanted the Caribbean dial, and I wanted something that I could go from the beach to the pool to dinner with, and not have a big orange. I love the orange, but I didn't want the orange or the yellow. So the blue to me is just, it blends in with everything. So that one specifically, I went with the blue. This one, I went specifically for the blue. But other than that, no. Everything just sort of randomly happened in the collection.
So between the Ressence and the Fast Rider Black Shield, I'm guessing these weren't consecutive purchases, so what occupied your collecting passions between that first luxury watch and getting into independence?
So after I got this, when I was researching the 1655, I also found the 16550, the cream dials, the first 1984, 85, maybe in 86, where the white dial turned cream. And I love that. It was a fantastic looking watch. And I ended up finding one out of an auction in Switzerland. And so I'm like, you know what, maybe I'll just collect Rolex Explorers at that point. Because all I had was the Tudor and that. This came out, I think, around the same time, the Black Bay Bronze Bleu. But you could only get it in Europe at the Bucherer stores. But my cousin lives in Germany. And so I'm like, can you put your name in there? I want that watch. So she went down to the local AD, put her name on the list. And for whatever reason, I'm thinking it's Rolex. I won't get it for 10 years.
That was around 2017?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And so anyway, so I'm like, all right, well, she put her name on the list. I'll probably won't get one for a long time. Well, in the meantime, I bid on the Rolex Explorer 2 16550 and ended up winning it. And then literally like 2 weeks later, my cousin called. She's like, oh, I bought your watch. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm buying 2 watches right now. So wasn't really planning on that. But she just already went out and bought it because she just figured I wanted it anyway. So that's how I ended up with that. And so all of a sudden I went from 2 to 4 in an instant.
And is that why do you still have the transitional cream dial?
Nope, I sold the transitional cream dial. I had a Patek 5235G. I had an Urwerk 105 CT Maverick, that was a fantastic watch, and a Blancpain 50 Fathoms, that one of 50 18 karat white gold, which I picked up out of the Grand Cayman. Unfortunately, I got rid of all 4 of those to go to the Greubel. But those are the only 4 watches I ever sold, and that's the only reason why, is because I wanted.
But I think it's important to talk about that. We'll get back to Doxa, and I think it's important to just emphasize that your collection runs the gamut. We've still got the G-Shock to talk about, but this is probably the watch that you mentioned is getting the most wrist time these days. And you took some pretty impressive hardware, the Patek regulator, the Urwerk, the transitional cream dial, and you turned it into this watch here. I guess you can only wear one watch at a time. Do you feel like it was a good condensing?
Yeah, the collection started to get out of control, and there's only so much cash you want into one hobby, and obviously there's a lot of cash in this hobby. And so, what's not on the table, I have 2 Bethunes which aren't here either. Those won't go anywhere. I love those 2 watches. So it's sort of like looking at the collection as I have way too much stuff. Most of it sits in the bank because I don't want all of it in my house, so I go back and forth to pick different stuff out.
And that's smart, putting it in a safety deposit. A lot of folks ask, where do I store my watches? That.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. When you have that many sitting in one, you can't have that many sitting in one spot. Regardless of whether you get robbed or a fire or whatever, it's a lot of stuff in one spot. So it just became too much to go back and forth with. So I'm like, all right, well, that's my grail. I really want to get this watch, and then let me skinny up the collection a little bit. And then once I got rid of those and had enough cash, I pulled the trigger on that. The Greubel was they're the pinnacle for me. It was the Grail watch, the end watch. Technically the GMT was the end watch, but that's farther down the line for sure. But this checks all the boxes for me.
Balancier sports watch, water resistant, shock resistant, loomed, titanium.
It checks every box. It really does.
Did you ever get to meet Stephen Forsey?
Yeah.
He's actually a really fun, engaging guy. I think that humanizes the brand for me.
And that's, when you look at all the independents, you can get that. You can get that at a Moser, pretty much any independent. They're just regular people. They love to talk to you. The Grönefeld brothers, they answer you on Facebook. People ask a question on Facebook, and Edward's out there answering them, right? So that's what's great about the independents, is they're all down to earth. They love watches just as much as we do. Max with MB&F, and they're all just great people. And I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of them. I had lunch with Martin, with Urwerk, and he's the one. That's after that lunch is when I bought the 105 CT.
Martin Fry, the designer.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Because when I looked at Urwerk, I'm like, they're so big, but they're not all that big when you put one on your wrist. And so I went out and I found a dealer that had them, and I put it on my wrist, and I'm like, all right, that's actually wearable.
The cool thing too is that this is hugely overlooked, and a lot of folks they poo-poo the notion with mechanical watches. But you told me this is the most accurate mechanical watch you've ever owned.
By far, yeah. Because I wear it all the time. I keep it wound, and I think, after a month, I'm not even sure if it loses 30 seconds after a month. I mean, it actually gains, but it's very, very accurate.
And I think that's really important because people just talk about beauty and history and craftsmanship. No one goes to Churchill Downs to see a beautiful horse.
Yeah.
Even though horses are obsolete technology, you want the fastest, most highly cultivated, best bred racehorse because it still counts when you cross the finish line in that context. And I think it still makes sense to build a mechanical watch with accuracy as a goal.
I mean, look, our phones are the most accurate we can get. So when you get to this type of money that you're spending on a watch, you want it to be accurate. You want it to function correctly, right? I mean, this is a piece of art at the same time, but it should keep good time for that amount of money. And Greubel does a fantastic job at it.
Now, you did mention the Bethune, and obviously we don't have them on hand here, but what we can do is we can throw up the graphics for our friends at home. Tell me a little bit about how you got into that brand, because Bethune's a little bit off the radar. It's a smaller independent. It's a favorite of mine, but it's not Moser, it's not FP Journe.
Yeah, I saw someone had one on one of the Facebook forums, I think, and I just thought that was so cool. Like just the design of it, the 3D moon phase, it was a DB28. I'm like, man, that's a cool watch. And I think like anything, when you get to that sort of weird, you really need to see one on your wrist. And I was able to go into New York, and I had one, and I fell in love with it. And then I ended up finding one secondhand.
And that was the Dark Shadows.
That was the black matte. Yep. Yeah. I mean that watch. That was a great watch, and that really got me into de Bethune because it looks great. It fits perfect. It's just a great all-around watch. And so from there, I've just fell in love with de Bethune in general. The kind of 2 is, it's another grail for me. The kind of blues, like all those watches are just great. The Stradivarius. So at that time, I can't remember, I think it was end of 2019 when they introduced the Bleu.
Yes, well, with the Bleu, you were telling me that was your exit watch, but also that the GMT Sport from Greubel Forsey is your exit watch. So
yeah.
It's amazing how exit watches become, a collection theme.
Yes.
You always say, oh, that's the last watch, it's the exit watch, and then the exit watch becomes a theme in and of itself in the collection.
So I'll say this, I've had this for a year and a half, and I haven't really thought about pulling the trigger on anything else since I've had it. So it's as close to an exit grail that I can think of. I don't know what the future will hold, but it checks all the boxes for me. And I wear it pretty much every day. I mean, it's just a fantastic watch. I've traveled with it, gone to Greece with it, been all over the States with it, been to Mexico with it.
Have you submerged it?
I have.
Okay, well, there you go. It's living up to, it is a sports Balancier.
Yeah, same with the de Bethune. I went snorkeling in Mexico with that, so yeah.
Now, the de Bethune has a dynamo lighting system, but it is not the only watch you have with a backlight, because you do have de Bethune in the collection, but you also have the infamous Casio. How did this happen?
So if I'm traveling, usually something like this is sitting in my bag somewhere. So I'll wear this through the airport, into taxis, going through Mexico or wherever else we are, because I always want a watch on my arm and not an Apple Watch guy. And so this is just a fantastic go anywhere, do anything watch. And I always like just the clear aspect of it.
I like that it's developing a yellow patina already.
It is. And it's not that old either. I think it's maybe 2.5, 3 years old. So.
Did you buy it at an authorized dealer?
I did.
You had the full AD experience.
Yes. Well, I bought it. It's an AD online that I know, so I didn't sit down and actually go through the wine and cheese pairing with the Casio. But yeah.
Well, these are not the Swiss. The Casio is perfectly happy if you buy your watch online.
Yes. Yeah.
But I love the fact that you've got a GA2100. I think it's the SKE. And you wear this unironically. You love watches at every level. This costs, what, $100?
Yeah. Yep.
So you've got Greubel Forsey and you've got G-Shock. They both get clearly enough wrist time that they're starting to change color. And frankly, I think it just proves you can have a lot of fun, but also that the collector's journey is not linear. Normally when I shoot one of these, I start with the beginning and we end up with like, what's your Grail watch? Here, we've moved from the Grail watch back to Casio, and that's kind of how you collect.
Look, I think you have to buy what you want, and you have to buy what you like. And I never bought into the hype of what everybody else was going after, because when I bought the de Bethune Black Matte, it was that or an FP Journe at the time, and everybody asked was like FP Journe, FP Journe, FP Journe, and I'm glad I didn't go with that. I'm glad I went with my gut and what I really liked, which was the de Bethune, because that opened me up to the brand and something that I'll probably never let go of. Where the FP, I may have sold that at this point. to get into the Greubel, because I don't think it would have meant as much as the de Bethune did to me.
And I don't think it's your style, frankly. You got into indies with Ressence.
Yep.
You had an Urwerk. You've got a couple of de Bethune. You've got Greubel Forsey. You like stuff that's a little bit offbeat, and I'll even say that this Grönefeld aesthetically is a little bit offbeat, but in a good way. How'd you cross paths with that watch?
So same thing, 2019, I was at Watch Time, and that's right when they started to get really, really big and busy, and everybody was throwing the name around. And I've seen one of those at an AD, and Richard Teven, who's a friend of mine, ended up buying that one.
He's on the Facebook group.
Yep. And I just fell in love with that watch as well. And then so I'm at Watch Time, and I was talking to Steven Rostrovsky, and I'm like, what's going on with Grönefeld? And he's like, yeah, they just went crazy. And he's like, I got 2 dials. The watches aren't produced yet, but I have 2 dials.
Was that Watch Time in LA?
New York.
Oh, New York.
Yeah.
That was the end of the line. That was almost like the closing of the gate for these.
It was, yep. Because he's like, I got 2, and that's all I'm going to get. They aren't produced yet. It's going to be another 6 to 8 months. But if you want them, you have to let me know. He had 2, but he's like, one of them's already sold. And so he showed me, it was like I think it was a Piece Unique gold dial, if I remember right. It's like, so I had this one for sale. I'm like, I don't know what I want in gold, but I really want the watch. It's like, well, call me on Monday. If it hasn't sold, you got to put a down payment. So I'm like, all right. So I call him on Monday. I'm like, all right, I want it. He's like, well, actually, the gold sold. I have the red. I'm like, great. I want the red anyway. So, and that's in steel. It may be a 1 of 1 because they didn't make very many in steel of the 188.
And it's beautifully color coordinated. It's got the carry dial.
Yep. The carry dial, and yeah, it may be a 1 of 1. So.
And when I said this watch is offbeat, I literally mean it's offbeat. It's got a couple of different heartbeats because of the presence of the 8-second Remontoire and the beat of the Swiss lever. I mean, this is a very cerebral watch. What drew you to it? Because the function is it's not easy to connect with what it does and how it works.
So I read the story of the Grönefeld brothers and their grandfather, great grandfather, that was fixing the clock all those years, and so that's where the idea of the Remontoire came from in 1941 for their dad, and just the whole story behind the watch is fantastic, and just the way it looks is great. And I think if you're going to do a Remontoire, I mean, I think they did it right. There's other Remontoires out there that are great. F.P. Journe has some and other ones, but that just the design of that watch was great. And then when you turn it over, you can't beat a movement like that.
Oh, it's monumental.
And that's another thing that you can't find anywhere else.
Have you met Tim and Bart?
No, I've never met them in person.
You definitely need to. You talk about that firsthand experience of knowing your watchmaker. They're both a lot of fun. I can't keep up with that pair, so I say hi, and then they go out and they party, and again, that's beyond my pace of action, but they're definitely fun-loving dudes, and not being a customer, they allowed me to interview both of them, like in the middle of the night in Europe from the US East Coast. I mean, what more can you say about the accessibility of dudes? I wasn't even a customer.
I mean, they're on their own Facebook Grönefeld page, and they're on their own Instagram, and they answer people on those as well. So going back to the independence and just having that, I can actually reach out to the guy that made that watch, and he'll answer any question that I have for him. So.
Okay, so this is a lot of fun, and actually talking about how we like the way watches look, like this was really cool. I mean, it's got what looks like a skeleton caliber with an automatic rotor in the back. First glance, I thought it was a chronograph. It's actually a calendar with a second time zone. But at different points in your watch collecting journey, you were drawn to the way they look. Yep. Aesthetics are important.
Absolutely. I mean, again, anything keeps time. It's art. At this point, it's art, right? When you look at something like this, it's art on your wrist. People collect art, they put it on a wall or a vase or whatever. This is just art that you can put on your wrist.
And I think the lesson there is that at every step of your collecting journey, you need to go with what looks good and not what people tell you is the right answer. Because people have told me that the right watch is a watch that I think is boring or ugly or badly proportioned, or it just doesn't sing to me, and I'm a weird guy. I'm wearing a Devon Tread and a Garrick at the same time. Don't underestimate aesthetics.
Yep.
So talk to me a little bit about, well, I guess we're not supposed to talk about this watch, but that's okay because we already broke the fourth wall there. Tell me a little bit about this and how you were drawn to this one aesthetically from Moser.
So that came from a dealer in New York, and I was in New York with my wife. We stayed there for the weekend during Christmas, and I was wearing the Ressence actually, and so the the guy that was in there, he's like, oh, cool Ressence, because they sold Ressence as well. And then we started talking about independence. They also had Bethune, they had Greubel, they had a lot of different brands. So I spent literally an hour talking to this guy just about watches, trying different things on and having a fun time. And so we started talking about Moser, and another brand that was just coming up and getting popular in the U.S. And he's like, I got something to show you. And so he brings this out, and he's like, it's a Pioneer X. They have an X line, which is a secret watch. And
don't tell anyone.
Don't tell anyone. Don't. So I like the concept of it, right? It was supposed to be for collectors only, and if you want to buy the X, you get the X, but no one else knows
it's a word of mouth
exists.
watch. It's not
Correct.
an ad campaign watch.
Exactly right. Yep. Nobody else knows that he exists and that kind of stuff. And it's a left-handed crown Pioneer with 8 markers. It's just a weird looking watch. And again, that's what drew me to it. It's a weird watch. But it's still got a fantastic dial. There's no name. There's no Moser name on the dial.
And that brings us back to aesthetics. It's not branding. There's no branding.
Yeah, there's no branding. I mean, if you're not into watches, people that know Moser would say that's a Moser, right? It's hard to not pick out a Moser these days, but yeah, if you're not into watch, you have no idea what this is. And that's what drew me to it. It's just so weird and quirky and different and rare. At the time, they told me 8. I ended up meeting Edward like a month later for dinner. He said there was 9 that they made. So it's rare and it's different.
And again, you got to meet the CEO for dinner. He's out on social media like the Grönefelds. I see him on my Facebook group. Like, this is what it means to be in the independent space. It's not about buying a watch that the other guy doesn't have. It's about being able to connect to a human being behind the product. Because, if ChatGPT could make you a cool watch, I'd still rather some imperfect thing made in Norfolk, England. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, when you line this up, the Grönefeld to Richard's Grönefeld, they're both red, they're both the same design, but they're not. They're different because you can tell it's all hand done. His is a little bit different color.
By definition, they can't be the same.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what's great about it. So ChatGPT would make the exact same thing. It would just be a printed thing, right? And but you can tell it's hand done.
So now, this could have been a Rolex Submariner. Going back to the Doxa, why wasn't it?
I love the look of that. I love the 70s feel of the Doxa. And again, I just wanted something that could go, and I wanted something that I could do anything with and not really worry about. And that's a fraction of the price of a Rolex sub. And to be honest with you, I don't want a Rolex sub. I never did. I could use this in the same way, right? But that to me is just it's just a great watch.
It's a lot of fun. It's great looking. It's historically true. It's got a helium escape valve at a very accessible price. It's got a dive extension, beads of rice bracelet, really rugged base caliber, and one of the best sounding bezels. I'll do it right now again. That's just bang for the buck.
Yeah. So every time I go on vacation, that goes with me. That's pretty much the only time I wear it. But if I'm at a beach, that's on my arm.
Now, one type of watch that I think all of us experience at some point in our watch collecting lives is the heirloom watch. We either get one or we give one, and that's exactly what happened right here with this Omega. You actually didn't know this watch existed for a while, did you?
For a while, yeah. So at some point in high school, my grandfather gave that to me. I had no idea when. It's engraved on the back to his brother for 46 years at New York Telephone, which I think became Ma Bell or whatever it was. But anyway, so I think I had just bought the vintage Rolex, and I was having a conversation with my dad about vintage Rolexes and just the watch market in general. He's like, oh, my dad used to have this watch from his brother, and it was a cool gold watch, and it just like sparked this memory. Like, I think I have that watch, and so I go upstairs and I start going through all these old files and barrels, and it's at the very bottom of this box, squished by all the paperwork, just sitting there, and I pick it up and it starts to tick. And I'm like, that's really cool. I had no idea it was there. That thing traveled with me for years, and I had no idea it was still there.
And I would say this is probably the last watch in the world I'd ever expect to encounter on a olive green military NATO.
So I wanted something to make it a little more modern, so I could wear it, and I thought, well, I'll put a military NATO on it just for fun.
You don't have enough wrinkles to wear a tiny gold watch?
Yeah, no, not really. The bracelet that it had on it was like this weird stretch. I don't even know what the heck it was. It wasn't part of the watch originally, but it was too big. It was too big for my wrist, and it was really weird how you'd adjust it. So I'm like, I'll just.
No, it looks fantastic. I'm glad you did, and actually, it looks like the case hasn't really been touched much because there's like Bosco Reale tarnish on it, and that's the first thing that goes when you refinish.
Yeah. it's probably never been serviced, so who knows?
Okay, then I'm going to stop winding it up in that case. I'm not going to run it.
You know, my wife wears this more often than I do at this point. You know, she'll throw it on every once in a while if we go out. But yeah, it's a cool watch from, you know, I don't know when he got this, probably somewhere in the 60s, I would assume.
So now I got to ask, because your collection has grown, it's also shrunk a little bit. There have been watches in, watches out, and 4 watches I think were condensed into the Greubel. Do you have like a philosophy of like limiting the volume, or do you have a 1 watch in, 1 watch out rule? How do you manage just the bulk of it?
I don't. There's no necessarily. I don't have a philosophy around it. And when I went to sell the specific watches, it wasn't necessarily. I'm definitely going, to get rid of these. It was just those are the ones that I knew I could sell that somebody else would take and be able to resell. And I don't know. There's no real philosophy for it. It is what it is. I don't really put a whole lot of thought into. I think because like people like you and other people put so much information out, like, we as collectors get to sit there and listen to it and learn. And so I always sort of know in the future, if I did X, I'd want, something. So, that's what's great about what you guys do here. You give us a lot of information and keep us up to date on all the new stuff and all the old stuff. And,
I try to be a
awesome.
resource.
Yeah.
But the other thing that's kind of cool is that, this is where I usually ask, like, well, what's your Grail watch? But I don't think your next watch is necessarily going to be a Grail watch, because you went from Grönefeld to Casio. So where are you looking? What interests you these days at any price point or in any segment?
So if I were to buy something else, it has to sit next to this or the day Bethunes and say, my brain has to go, I want to wear that as opposed to this today, right? And there's not a whole lot of watches out there that will do that for me at this point. So the day Bethune kind of 2, that's just a fantastic watch as a Grail watch or a next watch.
Tourbillon or GMT?
Tourbillon, got to go with the Tourbillon. I love their 30-second Tourbillons. The MB&F Evos are fantastic watches. So that would be on the list, and anything Greubel. I mean, after having this, they're really hard to beat. I think that's as big as they are. Like people, obviously know the name. I don't think they've really hit their stride yet, and I think they, I know they're making some changes internally. Who knows what that means long term, but. Yeah, we'll see what they do in the future.
I agree with you there, because if you look at Greubel Forsey pre-owned, sometimes selling for $100,000 below the list price, for the quality you get relative to the original price, they're one of the best pre-owned buys in the world right now. Now, that's not as easy to do with the sports watches, because people are looking for those and those get snapped up. But if you want an old gold, like white gold, double tourbillon 30 degree, today it's like a $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 watch. You can get it for $250,000 used. That's not cheap, but relative to new, that's an opportunity.
Yeah, and it's hard to beat that. I mean, people are paying that for the Paul Newmans, right? And
an old chronograph.
Right. So price is all relative once you get up to that amount. But the quality that you get in those is you can't get anywhere else. It's hard to beat what Greubel does from a quality standpoint.
Okay, so we're not going to do the typical Grail watch question, because we know, but what I do want, not looking forward, but looking back, because sometimes people watch these and they learn from our collectors, and I know a lot of folks who are watching this are learning from you. If you could go back to the guy who had watches like this Kenneth Cole, which I've learned is actually a calendar and a dual time, and this Tudor Fast Rider, which was your first luxury watch, what advice would you give a younger watch collecting version of yourself?
Know that your tastes are going to change over time. Regardless of where your price point is. I went from this being the coolest watch in the world to I wouldn't buy that today, regardless of price. It's just not something that draws me to it in the same way it did back then. And we're going back 10 years, right? So it's 10 years is 10 years, but it's not like it's 50 years. So your tastes are going to change over time. And when I got this, and I'm like, oh, that's one of the coolest watches ever, and now I don't really wear it that often. Not because I dislike it, it's not something I open the box and say I'm going to wear that today. So that's one thing. Thinking about watches and an investment, can you make some money on a watch here and there? Maybe, but it's still not easy to sell them. And going through the selling of those 4 was very difficult. Especially the vintage one, because vintage is just a minefield. And even though I had one that I knew was all original, it was tough to find someone that wanted to spend that type of money on it because they didn't know at the end of the day. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. My tastes have changed drastically over the years, and I think most people are like that.
So be ready to shift gears down the line.
Yeah, and be ready to, if you don't have the money to get to the next watch and you're thinking about that you'll just sell some of the other ones, know that it's not that easy to sell them if you want top dollar out of it. It's always easy to sell them if you're going to take a hit on them. That's one thing. But to get the real value, I spent full $5,000 on this. I don't think I'd get $2,000 out of that today. So that's something that you have to accept in the different price points that you may buy in.
Well, thank you so much, Shane. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
I've had a lot of collector conversations, and this is one of my favorite from among my collection of conversations.
Appreciate that. Well, thanks for the time today. I know we had some fun earlier, so if there's anybody else out there that wants to do this, know that Tim will show you some really cool pieces while you're waiting for them to take the pictures of your watches. And,
do you have an Instagram account, by the way?
I do. It's Watch Your Opinion. I had an idea for that years ago that I never did anything with, but it's still Watch Your Opinion is my Instagram page.
Be there or be square, like a Santos.